Now, it's been 2 years since the war in Yemen began. The UN estimates that up to 10,000 people have been killed and that 18 million need some kind of humanitarian help. And now a report by Amnesty International says the weapons industries in the US and UK, two of the world's biggest, are contributing to the suffering there. It says the two countries have together sold more than $5 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia since the start of the conflict. Saudi Arabia has been leading a military coalition against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Amnesty says that is more than 10 times the $450 million of aid that they sent to Yemen over the same period. But the American and British arms industries are of crucial importance to their economies. In the US, 4.4 million people are directly or indirectly employed by the defense sector. That is around 2% of the workforce. By contrast, the agriculture sector there employs just 1.4% of American workers. In the UK, that figure stands at 372,000. That is 1.2% of British workers. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Hasan Al-Haifi. He's a political analyst in Sanaa about the devastation caused by the war to Yemen's economy.
There is no place in Yemen that is not subject to bombardment. It used to be in the past that when Yemen was at war, people would go from the city to the rural countryside to avoid, being involved in the conflict. Now there is no place safe in Yemen. Now in the central bank in Aden, and most of the government, 80% of the government employees are in the north, where the Houthis and the national forces, rule. And this was one of the most, serious, really and tragic moves by the international community to allow the Hadi government to take the central bank to Aden. For a year and a half, the central bank was paying salaries to all the government employees, even in the southern side, where the coalition was supposedly had liberated the areas. They also paid the salaries of even Hadi's guards. And still, the central bank was left aloof, aside from the conflict. Now they took over the central bank, they took over its money. And of course, this is a serious drawback to many people who are dependent on fixed incomes from the government. Leave Yemen alone. We Yemenis can settle our own problem. We will have no problem solving our problems together as long as there is no interference either from the US, from Great Britain, from Saudi Arabia, we don't have we never attacked anybody. There is no real reason to have this war on us. Why should the world care how we live or who governs Yemen or, as long as we are not bothering anyone? We did not attack Saudi Arabia. We did not attack any Gulf states. We did not attack anyone. So why should they care about, who rules Yemen or what rules Yemen, as long as the Yemeni people are the ones who decide?
Let's get a broader perspective on this now from our editor-at-large, Craig Capitas, who joins me now live from Paris. Craig, as we heard there, a very interesting insight from Sanaa itself as to how this war has really torn apart the economy of a country. Tell me, though, you've been covering war and commerce for many years. Is there any way, really, to decouple war and industry?
The arms industry operates on Bismarck's maxim that nothing should be left to an invaded people but their eyes for weeping. It's a business of kill ratios and throw weights. And for those who pull the trigger, if you will, it's always easier for a country to launch an airstrike than for a country to live up to its own principles, in this case, what's going on in Yemen with the food. It's a nasty situation all around.
Craig, let's focus for a minute on the US itself. The Trump administration has said that, it wants to reduce the amount of foreign aid that it's sending overseas, and at the same time, it wants to increase exports, including military exports. This is just going to make things even worse, isn't it?
Indeed, it will. At least for the Trump administration, there seems to be no profit in believing in the basic goodness of humanity. The misfortune of Amnesty International's manifesto on Yemen is that it comes without cannon and musketry behind it. This is an old story. It's a tragic story. It's an old story. But the way the Trump administration, and in fact all countries that deal in this type of business look at it, is only the winners decide what are war crimes. And what they don't realize that countries that fight fire with fire usually end up with ashes. And that's certainly what the situation is in Yemen right now.
Craig, so if you're a US or a UK citizen and you're concerned about the situation in Yemen, what should you be doing to try and get your government to regulate things better or to pull out of this industry?
I would suggest they go to their local house of worship and pray, because there's just way too much money in the business. Just take a look at the statistics that you mentioned then are on the wall. Look at the difference between the amount of money on arms and the amount of money on food.
Craig,
it's because there is more money in weapons.
Interesting. As ever, Craig Kapitas in Paris. Thank you so much.